Make your kid apologize right now or get out of my house forever. Dad snapped after my nephew knocked over my child's food. My sister just stood there smirking while he blamed us instead. I didn't argue. I quietly took my family and left. The next morning, Dad showed up at my door in a panic, begging. At 7:12, the morning after Thanksgiving, my father pounded on my front door hard enough to rattle the storm glass in the frame. Not knocking, pounding, the flat of his hand over and over, like he wanted to come through the wood instead of past it. I opened up and he was standing there in yesterday's clothes. Same shirt from dinner, same gravy stain on the cuff. His face had gone the color of dishwater and he was breathing like he'd run the 4 miles from Fairlane Ridge instead of driving it. Daniel, his voice came out sanded down to nothing. You need to come back to the house. Why? Because your sister emptied the account. Behind him, tires screamed at the curb. Rebecca's white Tahoe came in at an angle and stopped half over my neighbor's grass, and she was out of it before it finished rolling, still in the cream sweater she'd worn to dinner, hair flat on one side. She came up my walk with her arm already extended, finger already pointed, and she was shouting before she cleared the mailbox. There he is! Ask him! Ask him where the money went! Up and down Delmar Court, doors opened. Mr. Alvarez set his rake against the porch rail and did not pretend to keep working. The Pittmans came out in bathrobes. Somebody's storm door hissed shut and then opened again, wider. He works in IT! Rebecca screamed it at the whole street. He built the whole thing! He had access to everything! And my father, the man who, 19 hours earlier, had ordered my 8-year-old out of his house over a dinner roll, turned and looked at me the way you look at a stranger standing too close to your car. Daniel, he said quietly, did you? I want you to understand something about that question. It wasn't rhetorical. He wasn't being cruel on purpose. He genuinely, honestly did not know. And in the 2 seconds before I answered, I watched 40 years of my life reorganize itself into a shape I could finally read. I went back inside without a word. Emily was standing in the hallway in her robe with her arms crossed, and she didn't ask me anything because she already knew. I came back out with 91 pages, still warm from the printer. Before you ask me one more question, I said, read page 63. My name is Daniel Keller. I'm 39. I've been a systems administrator at Halverson Freight Systems for 11 years, which means my entire professional life is logs, access logs, change logs, audit trails. When something breaks at 2 in the morning, nobody cares what anybody remembers. They care what the record says. That turns out to matter later. My wife Emily is a dental hygienist. Our son Noah is 8, small for his age, obsessed with a video game about foxes, the kind of kid who apologizes to furniture when he bumps into it. We live in a 3-bedroom townhouse on Delmar Court with a shared wall and a patch of grass you could cover with a bath towel. We are not rich. We are fine. My sister Rebecca is 42. She has been the favorite for all 42 of them. I don't say that with any heat anymore. It's just the geometry of the family. When Rebecca failed out of her second semester, it was because the professor had it in for her. When I got a B, my father asked what happened to the other 20%. When Rebecca totaled his truck at 19, she'd been overtired. When I dented a fender at 23, he told my mother, in the kitchen, at a volume he knew carried, that I'd always been careless with other people's things. Her mistakes were weather. Mine were character. Dad, Raymond Keller, 71, ran an HVAC company for 34 years and built it into 11 trucks before he sold it. He bought 4 acres up on Fairlane Ridge and put a house on it with a wraparound porch and a 3-car garage, and every family holiday for 2 decades happened in that dining room. At that long table under a chandelier he installed himself and mentioned installing himself at least once per meal. My mother Marilyn is 68. She irons pillowcases. She has spent her marriage translating my father into something more survivable, and she has never once contradicted him in front of another human being. And Rebecca has a son, Mason, who is 11. 2 years ago, Dad's bank pushed everybody to a new online platform, and he couldn't get in. He called me at 9 on a Sunday night, furious at the website the way he'd once been furious at a compressor. I drove out. I sat at his kitchen table for 2 hours and set the whole thing up. Username, password manager, security questions he'd actually remember, 2-factor to his cell. Then I set up the alerts. Balance thresholds, large transfers, failed logins. That's just what I do. I don't build a thing without telling it to yell when something's wrong. The alert emails needed a destination. I put mine in as a secondary while I was testing, and when I finished, I said, let me pull my email off the notifications so you're not sharing your business with me. He waved his hand at me without looking up from his crossword. Leave it, he said, in case I lock myself out. He never locked himself out. Not once in 2 years. But from that night forward, every time money moved in my father's accounts, my phone knew about it before he did. For 18 months, that meant nothing at all. Property tax, the propane guy, a $400 charge at a garden center in April that made me smile because it meant Mom had won the Rose argument. Then it meant something else. Thanksgiving was at the Ridge, like always. We got there at 2. Emily brought the green beans she makes with the shallots and a pie because you don't show up to my mother's house with one thing. Mason was already wound up when we walked in. I want to be careful here because he's a child, and children are mostly a rebroadcast of the signal they're raised in. But he'd spent the fall watching his mother talk about us, and it had gotten into him. He started small. He took the dinner roll off Noah's plate while Noah was looking at the television and ate it in 2 bites and grinned at him with his cheeks full. Noah didn't say anything. Noah never says anything. At the table, Mason flicked keys, 3 or 4 of them, off the tines of his fork, jerk at my son's face in the specific way kids do it, small enough that any adult who wants to can decide they didn't see it. I saw it. So did Emily. So did my mother, who looked at her plate. Then Mason leaned in, close to Noah's ear, and said something. I only got the end of it because Noah's whole body changed. Later in the car, Noah told me the whole sentence. Mason had told him he was a broke little loser because we lived in a townhouse with a shared wall, and Grandpa lived in a big house with a gate at the bottom of the driveway. My 8-year-old put his fork down and said, in a voice I had never heard him use, "Stop it. You're being a jerk." And Mason swung his arm across the table and sent Noah's plate off the edge. It went down the way those things go down. Loud, then quiet. Ceramic on hardwood. Spaghetti across the floor and up the side of my son's sneakers. Sauce on his sock. A meatball rolling almost lazily under my mother's china cabinet. Nobody moved for about 3 seconds. Then my father looked at my son, not at Mason, at Noah, and said, "Apologize to Mason." I heard it and my brain rejected it, the way you reject a word in a language you speak. "For what?" I said. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, not upset, comfortable. She had one arm hooked over the chair back and she was almost smiling, and she said, "For calling him a jerk." Emily's head came around. After Mason ruined his dinner, Rebecca shrugged, and there it was, the whole philosophy in 2 words. Kids play rough. He did it on purpose, Noah whispered. He was looking at the floor, at his shoes. My father's hand came down flat on the table hard enough to make the water glasses jump. Enough. The chandelier he installed himself threw light down onto the top of his head. My house. He apologizes, or all 3 of you leave and don't come back. I looked at my mother. She stared at her napkin. She smoothed it with 2 fingers, once, twice, like there was a wrinkle in it that had personally offended her, and she did not lift her eyes, and that told me everything I needed to know about the last 4 decades. I'd swallowed it my whole life, every holiday, every unfair split, every time I'd been the reasonable one because being reasonable was the only role left open. Not that night. Not with my kid looking at his own shoes. I stood up. "Okay." Dad blinked. "Okay, what?" "We're leaving." Rebecca laughed out loud. "Oh, please, Daniel, stop being dramatic." I didn't answer her. I got Noah's jacket off the hook by the door and zipped it to the chin, and Emily got her purse and the empty pie dish, because even furious, my wife was not going to leave a dish. "If you walk out that door," my father said to my back, "don't come crawling back." "I won't." The cold outside was the good kind, sharp and clean. We drove home with the heater roaring. Nobody talked for 2 miles. Then from the back seat, small, "Dad, did I ruin Thanksgiving?" I found his eyes in the mirror. "No, buddy, you didn't ruin anything. Here's what nobody at that table knew. It started on a Tuesday in August at 10:41 in the morning while I was rebuilding a mail server." My phone lit up on the desk beside me. Meridian Savings. Transfer alert. 9,000 word debited from HELOC. 3318. Posted 10:41 a.m. I looked at it the way you look at a smoke detector chirping. Mildly. It's probably the battery. Dad had a home equity line. Everybody in that generation had one. $9,000 is a roof. It's a septic field. It's a furnace. And my father had spent 34 years in furnaces. That night I called and asked how things were, and he told me, with some enthusiasm, that he was finally doing the roof, that Kestrel Roofing was coming out, that the estimate was fair. I said good. I meant it. 3 weeks later, I drove past on my way back from a client site, and the roof was the same roof it had been in 2019. Same lifted shingle over the garage, same green streak down the north slope where the gutter overflows. So I called Kestrel. I told them I was Ray Keller's son, and I wanted to check on the scheduling. The woman on the phone was pleasant and thorough, and had me spell the last name twice. "I don't have a Keller anywhere," she said. "Not this year. Not last year. We've never quoted that address." And here's the part I keep coming back to, because it's the moment I could have moved and didn't. The money hadn't gone to a person. I pulled the alert back up on my phone in the Kestrel parking lot and actually read it for the first time instead of glancing at it. Transfer to TJR Holdings, LLC, 4471, not a roofer, not a contractor, a limited liability company I had never heard of in my life. I sat in my car with the engine off for 11 minutes. I told myself 6 different stories. My father is a grown man. My father ran a business with 11 trucks. My father does not need a systems administrator to explain money to him. I decided it was nothing. September 9th, $11,000. Same account, same destination, 2:15 in the afternoon. That night, I did what I do, which is research, because research is the socially acceptable version of panicking. TJR Holdings, LLC took about 90 seconds to find on the Secretary of State's business search. Domestic limited liability company. Active. Organized 14 months earlier, which meant it had existed for over a year before the first transfer I saw, sitting there like a bucket under a slow leak. Registered agent, Todd J. Reyes, Todd, Rebecca's boyfriend. The family had met him exactly once, at Mason's birthday in the spring. A big genial guy in a quarter zip who called my father chief and left early. And the registered address wasn't an office. It took me one more search to place it. A strip mall on Coburn Road, between a nail salon and a sandwich shop, which is a UPS store. Suite 214 was a mailbox. It was a mailbox 1.5 miles from my sister's house. My hands were fine. That's the thing nobody tells you. I kept waiting for the movie reaction, and it didn't come. What I got instead was a sort of low hum in my back teeth and the sudden, stupid, specific thought that I hadn't eaten dinner. I took a breath and I did the reasonable thing. I texted Rebecca a screenshot with the account number blacked out. "Hey, is Dad investing in something with Todd?" odd, saw a couple of transfers, and want to make sure he's not getting talked into anything. She called instead of texting. She was warm. That's what people get wrong about Rebecca. She isn't cold, she's warm. That's the entire mechanism. Oh my God, Danny, you scared me. No, it's Dad's helping with a project. It's a whole thing. He's very proud of himself about it. You know how he gets. A laugh. Why are you looking at his bank account? I'm not looking at it. I built the alerts. They come to me. A pause with something moving inside it. Well, she said, still warm. Maybe turn those off. It's kind of his business, right? 2 days later, my Aunt Deb called me, ostensibly about Christmas, and asked in the tone people use when they've been assigned a question whether everything was okay with me financially. Because Rebecca had told her I'd been snooping in Dad's accounts, that I was jealous, that I was maneuvering to get written into the will. That's when I stopped asking and started saving. October 14th, $13,000. By then I had a folder. I'd like to say I built it out of courage. I built it out of self-preservation because I'd been in that family for 39 years and I knew exactly how this ended. Something would break and my father would need a name to put on it, and he would look at me the way he'd looked at me about the fender. Every alert email, exported to PDF. Every one, time-stamped, filed by date. That night, I did the arithmetic I'd been carefully not doing. 9 plus 11 plus 13 is $33,000 in 10 weeks, which is bad, but it's survivable bad. It's a mistake you can walk back. Then the alert scrolled and I saw the second line, the one under the transfer amount, the one I'd been reading past since August because my eye went where the dollar sign was. Available credit, $19,400 of $200,000. I read it 3 times, a $200,000 line, and there was $19,000 left in it. I sat forward so fast my chair rolled out from under my legs. $33,000 was what I'd seen. It was not what had happened. It was the last 10 weeks of something that had been running since before I got my first alert, since before TJR Holdings had even finished its paperwork maybe. The alerts only fired above a threshold I'd set myself 2 years earlier, at a kitchen table being helpful. Anything under 5,000 had gone through in total silence. I'd built a smoke detector and hung it on the second floor of a house that had been burning in the basement for a year and a half. That was the night my hands finally did the thing. I tried to type my own password into my laptop and got it wrong twice. I called Meridian in the morning. I explained, carefully, that I was concerned about transactions on my father's line of credit. The representative was kind and completely immovable. Was I a signer on the account? No. Was I an authorized user, a joint account holder, or a power of attorney on file? No. Sir, I'd love to help you. I can't discuss this account with you. Your father can call us anytime. So I called my father. I kept it light. I said there were some new fraud protection features and I could come out Sunday and turn them on for him, free, 20 minutes. There was a silence on the line with a whole conversation inside it. A conversation he'd clearly had with somebody else about me. Rebecca's been helping your mother with the bills, he said. It's handled. Mind your own business, Daniel. And he hung up on me. My father hung up on me at 68 days before Thanksgiving for offering to protect him. November 2nd was my mother's birthday and we went, because you go. It was fine. It was pleasant. Rebecca didn't come. She had a showing. Mom made her own cake, which she does, and Dad talked about the chandelier. 2 things happened that night. The first was mail. There was a stack on the counter by the phone, the way there always is, and I was reaching past it for a coffee cup when I saw the window envelope on top with the Meridian logo and the red band along the edge that banks use when they've stopped being polite. I didn't open it. I want to be clear about that. I never opened my father's mail, then or ever. But red band envelopes say the same 4 words through the window every time, and these said, immediate attention required. Payment past due. My father, who had never been late on anything in his life, who once drove to a hardware store in an ice storm to settle a $19 account, was behind on a payment. The second thing was smaller and worse. He asked me about my truck lease. I told him. 20 minutes later, over cake, he asked me about my truck lease again. Not as a follow-up, not building on the first conversation. From the beginning, same phrasing, same little joke about the mileage cap. And when Mom said, Ray, he just told you that, he snapped at her hard, way out of proportion, and then he got quiet in a way that scared me more than the snapping. In the kitchen afterward, drying dishes, I said, Mom, is Dad okay? And is there something going on with the money? She kept her hands in the water. Don't make trouble, Danny. That's not an answer. Your sister has it handled, she said. Don't make trouble. She still wouldn't look at me. I have thought about that a great deal since. At the time I filed it as cowardice. It was not cowardice. I just didn't have the last piece yet, which brings us back to Thanksgiving, and my son's shoes, and the drive home in the cold. We got in around 6. Emily heated a frozen pizza because none of us had eaten anything. We put on an old comedy Noah likes, and by 8 he was horizontal on the couch, laughing at a man falling into a fountain, no longer a boy who'd been thrown out of a house. At 9:40 my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I almost didn't look. Meridian Savings, transfer alert, $28,000, checks debited from HELOC. 3/18, transfer to TJR Holdings, LLC, 4471, posted 4:12 p.m. Available credit, 0.00 of $200,000, GAX, $28,000, 0. I stood in my own kitchen holding a phone and I checked the timestamp twice because it didn't seem possible that it said what it said. 4:12 p.m. I knew that minute. I had lived that minute. 4:12 in the afternoon was my father's hand coming down on the table. It was my house, he apologizes, or all 3 of you leave. It was my mother's fingers smoothing a napkin. My sister had sat at that table with her arm hooked over the chair back, smiling at me while my 8-year-old was being told to apologize for his own humiliation, and she had already done it. It was already gone. She had drained the last dollar of my father's house out from under him, and then she'd asked for a second helping of stuffing. I didn't sleep, not for 1 minute. At 2 in the morning, I went downstairs and started sorting everything, chronologically, from the earliest alert I still had, every statement notification, every screenshot, the Secretary of State filing for TJR Holdings with the registration date and Todd's name, the Kestrel roofing call log with the date and duration, even the text thread with Rebecca, exported whole, including the part where she told me to turn my alerts off. At 6, I printed it, 91 pages. The printer in the office took 9 minutes and got hot enough to smell. At 7:12, somebody started pounding on my front door. So now you know what I was holding on the porch. My father took the stack from me with both hands because it was too thick for one. Rebecca was still going, still loud, still pointing. He set it up, he had the passwords, ask him about the passwords. And Mr. Alvarez had stopped even pretending. And somewhere behind me, Emily had closed the door so Noah wouldn't hear his aunt in the street. Dad turned pages. He is a slow reader. He licked his thumb, which he has done my whole life, and it took him close to a minute to get to 63. He stopped. I watched my father read 11 words and get older. Read the time, I said. His mouth moved without sound. Read it out loud, Dad. 4:12. Barely there. 4:12 in the afternoon. What were you doing at 4:12 in the afternoon yesterday? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I watched it land. The table, his hand, the water glasses jumping, my son looking at his shoes, and I watched him understand that while he was throwing his grandson out of his house to defend his daughter's honor, his daughter was 3 feet away with her phone in her lap taking the last $28,000 out of the walls of that house. Rebecca stopped talking. That was the first time all morning the street went quiet. She recovered fast. She's always been fast. That's obviously fake, she said. He works in computers, Dad. He can make anything say anything. And my father, and I will give him this one thing. I will give him exactly this one thing. Looked up from page 63 and said, not to me, Rebecca. Go home. Dad, go home. She went. She backed the Tahoe off the Pittman's lawn hard enough to leave 2 ruts they had to reseed in the spring. My father sat down on my front step in his gravy-stained shirt, 71 years old, with 91 pages on his knees, and he said, I don't know what to do. I said, I do, but you're not going to like the first part. The first part was that I stopped being his son for about 10 days and became a documentation problem. Here's what I understood that morning that he didn't. I was the most obvious suspect in the world. I built the logins. I had the recovery email. My address was on the alerts. If this went anywhere official, and it had to go somewhere official, the first person any competent investigator would look at was the IT guy in the family who'd been quietly collecting the account activity for 4 months. So I did the only thing that made sense. I called a lawyer before I called the police. Priya Raghunathan has practiced elder law in this county for 21 years and has the specific, unhurried calm of somebody who has heard your family's exact story 200 times. She took us on the Monday after Thanksgiving, Dad, Mom, and me, in a conference room with bad coffee. She read for 40 minutes without saying anything. Then she put the stack down. Mr. Keller, she said to my father, have you ever signed a power of attorney? Dad said no. Mom said nothing. And I felt the temperature of the room change, and I still didn't put it together. Priya asked her paralegal to pull the county recorder's site on the laptop and turned it around so we could all see it. Durable power of attorney, Raymond A. Keller to Rebecca A. Keller, recorded 19 months earlier. General authority, including banking, real property, and borrowing. And underneath it, filed 6 days before Thanksgiving, something else. That, Priya said, is a purchase and sale agreement recorded as a memorandum against the property. Your house is under contract. My father said, no, it isn't. Sir, it is. 4 acres and the house on Fairlane Ridge, under contract to TJR Holdings LLC for $310,000. Closing scheduled at Brookhaven Title and Escrow. Priya did the appraisal lookup while we sat there. County assessment on that property was $498,000, and she said dry as chalk that the assessor is usually low. My father had spent 34 years in other people's attics to buy that ridge. He said, that's my house, in the voice of a man asking a question. I asked when the closing was. Priya scrolled. Monday, she said. December 4th, 10 a.m. That was 6 days out. What happened over those 6 days involved more competent professionals than my family had encountered in its entire history, and I want to name them, because they are the reason this story has an ending instead of just a wound. Douglas Ferrante, senior fraud investigator at Meridian Savings, 14 years, a soft-spoken man with a voice like a hold music apology. He was the first one who told me I was a suspect, and he was decent enough to tell me to my face. I have to say this plainly, he said, in a windowless room at the branch on Route 9. You had administrative access to these accounts. You have the recovery email. From where I sit today, you are inside the circle. I know, I said. That's why I'm here on a Tuesday with a lawyer instead of a Saturday with a story. He almost smiled. Then I gave him everything. My laptop, my phone, my password vault export, the whole folder, and Priya made sure it went across correctly, with a receipt, an inventory, and a chain of custody form, because evidence you hand over casually is evidence somebody can say you touched. 2 things came back from Ferrante's side within 72 hours, and they were the whole case. The first was device data. Meridian's platform logs every session. IP, device fingerprint, timestamp. The $28,000 transfer on Thanksgiving originated from a mobile session on an iPhone that had authenticated authenticated to that account 141 separate times over 19 months. That device had never once been my device. And at 4:12 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day, that phone was on the Fairlane Ridge Wi-Fi network, the network in my father's house, the one whose password was the dog's name, the one Rebecca was sitting inside of, at the table, with her arm hooked over the chair. The second was the signature card. TJR Holdings LLC's business checking account at Meridian listed two authorized signers, Todd James Reyes and Rebecca A. Keller. She hadn't just received the money. She was on the receiving account. She'd been on it for 15 months. Ferrante filed the suspicious activity report the same afternoon and referred it out, and that's how we got the second name. Detective Angela Ruiz, 16 years with the Whitcomb County Sheriff's Office, 11 of them in the Financial Crimes Unit. She wore reading glasses on a chain and treated my 91 pages like a person and not a stack. "This is the best organized civilian file I've gotten this year," she said, "which is also the reason my supervisor is going to ask me whether you built it to frame your sister." "I know. Are you going to be annoyed when I ask you the same thing 4 different ways?" "No, ma'am." "Good. Most people are." She asked me the same thing 4 different ways. I answered it 4 different ways. Then she got to work. The third name was Lorraine Ashby, 12 years with County Adult Protective Services, who opened a case on my father within a week and who, at the kitchen table on Fairlane Ridge, asked him a set of questions so gentle and so precise that I had to go stand on the porch. She was the one who said the phrase out loud for the first time. "Mr. Keller, what I'm looking at is financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I want you to hear that it is a crime that happens to smart people. It happens to people who ran businesses. It happens because somebody with access is patient." Ashby is also the reason we got the fourth name, because she pushed for a capacity evaluation, and my father, who had never voluntarily seen a doctor in his life, went. Dr. Marcus Whitlow, geriatrician, 23 years, 2 hours of testing, an MRI, a follow-up, mild cognitive impairment, early, manageable, with a specific note in the record, measurable decline in complex financial reasoning, with onset the family placed at roughly 2 years prior, 19 months of transfers, 2 years of decline. She'd started the month she noticed. And then there was Nathan Okonkwo, CFE, the forensic accountant Priya brought in, 18 years, who spent 4 days rebuilding the whole thing into a single spreadsheet that I still cannot look at without my jaw setting. Total drawn from the home equity line over 19 months, $218,600. Of that, $9,400 went to actual household expenses, mom's dental work, the propane, a water heater. That's the part that made it work. Every few weeks, a real bill, paid from the same pipe, so that if my father ever squinted at a statement, there was always something on it he recognized. The remaining $205,200 went to TJR Holdings LLC, and out of TJR Holdings into a boat, a bathroom renovation, $41,000 of credit card payoffs, and 11 months of lease payments on a white Chevrolet Tahoe. She had been driving my parents' house. On Thursday, November 30th, Priya called me at 4:15 in the afternoon and said one sentence. "They moved the closing up. It's tomorrow at 1. I was in a server room. I remember the sound the door made. Here's what tomorrow at 1 meant. If TJR Holdings closed on that property, the deed transferred to an LLC. Once the deed transfers, you are no longer arguing about fraud. You are arguing about title against an entity with its own counsel in a process that takes 18 months and costs more than my father had, which was nothing because his equity was a boat. To stop it, we needed a temporary restraining order and a LIS pendens recorded against the property before the courthouse closed at 5 o'clock on Friday. To get the TRO, Priya needed a sworn affidavit from the property owner stating he had not knowingly authorized the sale. She needed my father's signature by noon. He wouldn't give it. I drove out there Friday morning at 8:20 and he was at the kitchen table with the pages, which he had been reading and rereading for a week like they might rearrange themselves. He had the affidavit in front of him and a pen next to it, and he had not touched either one. "She's my daughter," he said. "She's stealing your house. There'll be a reason. There's a boat, Dad." He put both hands flat on the table, same hands, same table, and he said, "If I sign this, they arrest her. If you don't sign this, you're 71 and you don't have a house. I'm not signing a paper that puts my daughter in a jail cell." And that was it. That was the wall. 40 years of it, right there in a kitchen. And it turned out the wall didn't move even when it was load-bearing on his own life. I went out and sat in my truck in the driveway, and I could hear my pulse in my ears and my hands were doing the shaking thing again. And I called Priya and told her, and she was quiet for a second, and then she said something I've thought about 100 times since. "Daniel, he's not the only witness." I said, "Whoa, what?" "Somebody watched him not sign that power of attorney 19 months ago. Notaries don't invent signers. Find out who was in the room." I went back in. My mother was at the sink, hands in the water, exactly where she has been my entire life. I stood next to her and I said, "Mom, 19 months ago, Rebecca had Dad sign a power of attorney. Except he didn't sign it, did he?" Her hand stopped. "She brought it to you," I said. "She told you it was for the doctors, for hospital forms in case something happened, and Dad wasn't there, and you signed as the witness, and you let the notary write down that he was." The water ran. And my mother said, to the window over the sink, in the smallest voice I have ever heard out of a human being, she said it was so I could go to appointments with him. Then, "I've been sick about it for a year and a half." That's what the napkin was. Thursday afternoon, when my father was throwing my 8-year-old out of the house, my mother couldn't look up, not because she She was afraid of him because she already knew what her daughter had done, and she had helped, and she'd been carrying it alone at that table with the good china out. I said, "Mom, I need you to tell that to a lawyer today." She dried her hands on a dish towel, folded it, hung it on the bar, and squared it. "Let me get my coat," she said. We were in Priya's office at 11:05. The affidavit, my mother's, not my father's, was signed and notarized by 11:40. Priya's associate filed the emergency motion at 1:50. Judge Harold Pruitt signed the temporary restraining order at 4:26 p.m. The Elias Pendens was recorded at 4:41, 19 minutes before the recorder's office closed for the weekend. Brookhaven Title got the notice at 4:52 and pulled the closing off the calendar. I found out in the parking garage of the courthouse. I had to sit down on a concrete parking bumper in a suit I hadn't worn since a funeral, and I put my head between my knees, and it took me a while. The notary was a woman named Sheila Vernon, and she kept a journal because the state requires it, and because she was, in the end, more careless than corrupt. Detective Ruiz got it on the second visit. The entry from 19 months earlier listed one signer, one thumbprint, and one form of ID, my mother's driver's license. Raymond A. Keller's name was on the document. It was not in the journal. That page became Exhibit D, and Priya told me later it was the single most damaging piece of paper in the file, because it turned "he must have signed and forgot" into a documented impossibility. A questioned document examiner compared my father's known signature to the one on the power of attorney and found simulation characteristics: tremor, pen lifts, a slow deliberate stroke where a genuine signature is fast and automatic. Rebecca was charged in February. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, a felony. Forgery in the second degree, identity theft. 9 counts total. She hired a good attorney and pled in June to 2 counts. 90 days in the county facility, 5 years supervised probation, and a restitution order for $214,600 at a payment schedule that will outlive us both. She served 61 days. The State Real Estate Commission does not wait for probation. Her license was revoked in April, which is the consequence I suspect she actually feels, because being Rebecca Keller with a lockbox key was the entire architecture of who she was. Todd Reyes pled to conspiracy and got probation and a civil judgment. TJR Holdings LLC was administratively dissolved in August. The boat was sold at auction. Somebody in the next county is fishing off my parents' back porch and doesn't know it. Sheila Vernon's commission was revoked, and she was referred for prosecution on a false certificate charge. I don't know how that ended, and I've made a decision not to find out. My mother was not charged. Priya negotiated that up front, and Ruiz agreed, and Lorraine Ashby wrote a paragraph in her file about a 68-year-old woman who was deceived about the nature of a document by her own child. Mom did 4 months of counseling on Ashby's recommendation, which is 3 months and 3 weeks longer than I ever expected my mother to talk to a professional about her feelings. The civil side settled in September. The purchase agreement was voided. The deed was never a deed, but the debt was still the debt. That's the part these stories usually skip. $214,000 had been drawn against that house and spent on a boat, and no court order unspends it. My father sold Fairlane Ridge in October, his own sale at his own price, $511,000. Paid off the line, paid Priya, and bought a 2-bedroom ranch on a flat lot in Merrick with a carport instead of a 3-car garage. He took the chandelier. He installed it himself in a dining room with an 8-foot ceiling, where it hangs about 10 inches too low, and he has mentioned installing it exactly once. That was last year. We had Thanksgiving at our house this time, because there is no big house anymore. 9 people around a table built for 6, with a card table on the end, and Emily's grandmother's tablecloth over the seam, so it looks like one thing. My parents came at 1, and my father brought a folding chair from his garage without being asked, which is as close to an apology as he has ever gotten, and I've decided close enough. He has never said the word sorry to me. He did say in October while we were loading boxes, "You kept telling me." That's the whole sentence. He said it to a lamp. He and Noah build model airplanes now. Badly. Dr. Whitlow says he's stable. Rebecca wasn't there. She's out. She's working retail management. She's in a rental across town, and she has not contacted me except once, in September, in a 4-page letter that was about how the family had abandoned her. I read all 4 pages. I didn't answer it. I don't hate her, which surprises me, but I also have no idea what I'd say. Mason was there. He's 12 now. He lived with us for the 61 days his mother was in county, in Noah's room, on a trundle bed, because the alternative was a placement, and Emily said absolutely not before I'd finished the sentence. He was a wreck for the first 2 weeks, and then he was just a kid. And my son, who had every right in the world to be cruel about it, instead taught him the fox game and let him have the good controller. They don't talk about last Thanksgiving. I've never brought it up. I don't think either of them needs me to. At dinner, the rolls came around, and Mason was reaching for the basket when he stopped, mid-reach, and looked across the table. Then he picked one up and put it on Noah's plate first. He didn't say anything. He didn't apologize. Nobody made him. My son said, "Thanks," like it was nothing, because to him it was, and went back to his potatoes. And my father, at the far end of the table under a chandelier hanging 10 inches too low, watched the whole thing happen and didn't say a word. He just put his hand flat on the table and left it there.